when I first started writing papers, and like I had a basic idea, but I didn't know that much. Like I had to write the results, right? And I had this big chunky table, and I'm like, if I put this entire big chunky table into my results, I'll look extremely smart. I'll look super smart. And here's the thing, they only gave us 1 page allowance for the results section. So I filled my entire, half of my 1 page with just this big chunky table. And then I was like, okay, now let me put a graph in there. But you know what ended up happening? I didn't have enough space. So now I go up to the teacher and I tell her that, look, I don't have enough space. And she tells me, well, you dummy, you don't need one entire page for that, chunky table. You can cut out points. You can provide a summary table. And so, there's so many things when it comes to writing results, because although it may just be graphs and tables, you want to present it really nicely. And so this video, we're going to look at how to make your results, how to write, a good, results section. Okay. So let's get straight into it. So your results should be composed of two main things. At first, you want to give an overall description of your experiments. You want to provide, that big picture without repeating the experimental detail. So since you are providing that big picture, you want to provide a rough idea of how the data would behave if the hypothesis was true, was or wasn't true. So you can say something like, ideally, if the results support the hypothesis, then these values, blah, 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 additionally this, that. So you want to give the results, but along with that, you want to give this overall description of the main things in those results. You don't just want to give them a bunch of graphs. You want to, focus on the key things that will be part of your discussion, because you're going to talk about your results in your discussion. So you want to start, discriminating. You want to be really selective. You want to start selecting the key points of data, because you're not going to use all of it. You're going to only need some key points, and that's where you use those points and you start writing about them. You start giving that overall description. Okay, so when you do write that description, you have to be selective with what you include and what you leave out. So if I'm writing about, concrete and the curing time of concrete, and I say this is what I used, this is the ratio of what was used to make the concrete, and I provide this whole long description of this and that and useless information and nothing about the curing time of concrete, in the discussion I'll have nothing to talk about other than all that useless information about how physical properties of concrete and blah blah blah. So in the results, if I talked about the curing time of concrete and I said this is the graph for how much it cures, and as you can see there's a striking increase after this many days, that kind of creates a good structure for my discussion. So here you want to be really selective with what you include and what you leave out, because you're creating that structure for your discussion. And you want to use representative data rather than endlessly repetitive data. So this is my mistake. I just put that whole chunk of table, that whole big chunky table, without actually thinking if we actually needed it, because you kind of got the idea when you looked at the first 5 or 6 table sets of values. And there I was with this endlessly repetitive data. It doesn't make you, look really smart or anything when you have this really big chunk of data. But you know what you can do? You can write that, check logbook page 79 for the entire data set. And so you're referring to that entire data set. Or you say check appendix. That's up to you. And so you're not wasting space in your results section, and you want to make sure that the person gets the key idea across. You just don't want to bombard them with numbers. And finally, the key thing you want to remember is clarity. You don't want to just use words that make you sound smart, and this is something that we've discussed in the key points video. Let's look at what's next. More key points. Redundancy. Never write about components of the data that are already clear. When you provide that description, you're going to have to write about components of the data, but don't write about the obvious things that this happened because of this, blah blah blah. x is proportional to y. As x increased, y did as well. This highlights that there's a proportional relationship. That is so much useless information. I can just see a graph and oh look, it's proportional. X, y, proportional. Wow. I don't need like this whole 2-sentence long to tell me that. Like, let's say it's like really, let's say something that I have a graph of this nature. It goes straight and then it dips. We can say there's a striking dip. Something that something that is more useful to say. I can say there's a striking dip at this x value, and so that is actually useful information rather than making a general statement that there's a proportional relationship. Now, if you kind of need to make those statements to talk about something else in your results, please go ahead, but don't make your first sentence that basic information that the reader can see too long. You can put it into one phrase. There was a proportional relationship between x and y. None of that as x increased, y increased, hence showing that there was a proportional. No, only do that with the things that really matter. Don't show your reader what they already can see. So yeah, because sometimes we think that I need to use up words now because it's not looking that as if I'm using so many words. And you know what ends up? We just fill it with useless words, and you think now look smart, and in the end we exceed the word count, and then you're like, oh, I shouldn't have added those extra words over there because I exceeded the word count anyway. So yeah, you don't want to start using redundant words early on because you'll regret it later. And another thing you want to do is you want to revisit your other papers to ensure that there's a good flow from the method, because in the method you also did this. So to ensure you can watch the method video, it is reader friendly to revisit those studies mentioned earlier. So you talked about the method of other studies, and then you can talk about the method of your study, and you can create that connection. And then later on in the results, you can talk about the results of the other study and the results of your study, and then again create that connection. So this can be very reader friendly. Okay. In the beginning, show and describe the key piece of data, the table, graph, anything. So, if someone's skimming your paper, they only want the key thing, right? They don't want all the useless in other tables before, like, they're not useless, but they don't want the other tables that you're not going to talk about a lot and at the start, right? They want the most striking, the graph that you personally know that is the most important, right? Because the reader doesn't know which graph is the most important, and so you have to present your information in a way. So you want to make the reader know, along with your text and the way you position that frame and the text, and you want to combine them to emphasize that, oh look, this is important, focus on this. And so yeah, in the beginning you want to show that key piece of data. The second thing is you want to create a frame. It changes your game. So when I talk about frame, is that how are you gonna position your photos and stuff, and your graphs? How are you gonna position those descriptive words? Are you gonna break them apart, or are you just gonna have one chunky paragraph of that, or are you gonna break it apart depending on where the graphs are? So that's something you want to focus on. So this links back to the last point. You want to give the most important graph at the start. That's your frame. You're creating a frame, because now the reader will subconsciously think that, oh look, this is the most important graph, I'll focus on this first, and all their focusing energy will go into that graph for that section, for the results section. Okay, now you want to find patterns with other research in the field. It reinforces and allows the reader to place your research on a map. So if you can say similar results were achieved by this research, what it does is that now there's a pattern. And don't make that pattern too specific. Like, don't make it like this value was associated with that value, and like there was only a 0.05 blah blah blah. Like, no, not that too specific. That of course depends on the field there, but you can make general statements like a similar gradient proportional relationship was seen in this research 2010 or something. And so that's your it reinforces your paper, and what it allows the reader to do is that they can subconsciously think that, okay, so I've read that original paper, and I've read like other papers that this person is citing. I believe that in that map, this is where the paper I'm currently reading would fit. Okay, and sixth, you want to use evaluative language. You want to show them what you want them to see. Because look, as I said, you want to create the frame. The reader doesn't know what the most important piece of information is, what's going to be discussed in the discussion, but you do. And so you want to start reinforcing it from the beginning, from the results. So look at this graph over here. So if you write, as can be seen in figure 3.1, the two curves are very similar. You will focus on the similarity because you've been told about the similarity. But then if you write, as can be seen in figure 3.1, the two curves are significantly different, you will only notice the difference between them. And so you want to do that. You want to use evaluative language. You know, to push your direct reader in the direction that you want them to go, in the direction that your discussion is. Okay, next. Okay, you want to use exclamatory language because this also changes, the perception that your reader has. Because you're not going to be able to use exclamation marks or onomatopoeia like they do in narrative stories, but you need to show, oh look, this is extremely important. And so you want to use exclamatory language. Like, let's say there was a change at 9 a.m. in temperature. You're going to think, okay, yes, there was a change. Or similar, you're just going to think this, or like 8 a.m., 9 a.m., boom, change. But then if I say there was a striking change between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., this is what you're going to think. That's how much it changed. And so, exclamatory language should be used to emphasize what you're trying to say, emphasize the graphs. And another thing with exclamatory language, if you say striking change, the reader will look at the graph and they will find that striking change. Now, problems. You want to talk about problems in, your results, because problems show character, but don't overemphasize them, because problems are something you talk about in your discussion. And so when you talk about those problems, you want to not overemphasize them, but mention them. And when you mention them, you want to mention them in a way that shows that it's not that big of a problem, or shows that you know what caused the problem and how it could be solved. Like, you could say the striking temperature drop at 9 a.m. was unexpected, and it was most likely caused by this. See, I'm using modal language. I'm saying it was most likely caused by. And so I'm putting, I'm adding kind of opinion into that scientific paper. And so it shows, first of all, the fact that you're mentioning that shows that, as a scientist, you know how to write a scientific paper. You're well known with all the methods and things. But then you're also showing that you know why it happened and you've done your research. Now, when you end off the results section, you want to end it off with a brief idea of the implications and explanation for the data. So you want to start creating that. If you check the flow diagram in the first video in the series, the key points video, what you'll see is that the results is very loosely touched to the discussion. And so when you end off your results, you want to do it so that it's nice and it flows nice with your discussion, and it's not too abrupt. So you can make this really striking, you can make this flow really obvious, or you can make it really subtle. That's up to you, and that's up to how other papers in that field are designed. Now, in the last slide, we talked about evaluative language and how you can use that to make the reader believe what you want them to. And so here are a few words that are evaluative language words. So a great deal of, a few, a little, a number of, abundant, appreciable, hardly, high, in some cases, large, less, those words. Okay. Next. Now, how do you model your results? So the key model is divided into 4 sections. You want to revisit literature, aim prediction, So you want to start by creating that flow. Then you want to make a general statement about the results. And then you want to invite them. This is where your frame comes in. You want to invite them to view the graphic or the content of graphic. In the second section, you want to go into the specifics of the key results. And here's where you use evaluative language to make the reader to focus, to create this, to lead the reader into the discussion. Now you're starting to create that flow into that discussion. You want to compare it with other studies, and then if there are any, and then you want to explain why these results happen. So you can say the motion of the ball, the results were tracked in a parabolic motion due to the force applied when the ball was thrown. Like the movement of the ball occurred in a parabolic motion because the force applied when the ball was something like that, but you don't want to go into too much detail, because if you're going to talk about it in your discussion, you want to leave some for that as well. Okay, and then in the third section, you want to look at problems and issues. And you don't just state the problems and issues, you give results and reasons. Fourthly and lastly, you want to give possible implications of results. So now the fourth point kind of leads into the discussion. So this is where you're creating that flow. Let's look at an example. Alright, this example is on bicycle exposure to particulate pollution using portable device for accurate measurement. This I got from Science Research Writing 2nd edition. Go check that book out. It's really good. And what I've done is that I've tabulated it. And so I've contextualized it so now that you can understand it even better. So at first the writer repeats or revisits the method, then they briefly summarize the method used in the study. You don't want to spend too much time on that. Look at other papers and how they do it in your field, and if they don't do it, don't waste your time. Okay, now you want to invite them to read the graphic. This is where you're going to create, that frame. This is where you're going to lead your reader into where you want to take them in the discussion section. Now you want to compare the results with others. See, now you're kind of giving the reader the ability to contextualize your paper with that of all of the others in the field. Now you want to direct your reader to your most important part, and you want to use evaluative language over here. That's the second point in the second section. Now the third point in the second section is the writer selects a specific result and they present it even more detail. So now you're kind of taking them into this specific direction. At every point they're taking them into the direction that they want them to go into. Finally, in the second point, the writer mentions a possible implication. Now in the third section, the writer mentions a possible limitation. Now look how they do it. The presence of vegetation is known to slightly alter BC and NO2 concentrations at different times of day, and the effect of this along the two routes was not investigated. Now you may think, oh, where's the reason? But they haven't provided the reason, but they've minimized its impact. They've used evaluative language. They said is known to slightly alter BC and NO2 concentrations. They could have said the presence of vegetation is known to alter BC, and that would have made a big difference, but they said slightly, and that that's what makes the difference. Finally, the writer focuses the reader's attention away from the problem and towards the positive value of this study. This in terms of the implications and applications. Nevertheless, the data obtained here suggests that using a portable emissions measurement system to measure BC and NO2 exposure will provide more accurate information for traffic management strategy. So now you're creating that flow. As I said, the last section is creating that flow, and that's what we're doing over here. And so this is how you write your results section. And it's not only about writing, it's also about creating that frame and how you want your information to be presented and how you can lead your reader into what they need to see and what you're going to talk about in your discussion. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next, we're going to look at discussion. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, that's very good, and I hope you learned something. Till then, bye bye, keep grinding.